Aloha, namaste. This is Alexis with Radha Home Yoga, and I'm here to talk about our full moon, which is happening Saturday morning, April 16th at 8:55 a.m. here in Hawaii, and that is 11:55 a.m. Pacific time. The particular place in the sky that it's in is the very beginning of sidereal Libra in a star called Chitra, and Chitra is the star that bridges Virgo and Libra together. Chitra itself is the brilliant, the beautiful, the ingenious, and that which is multifaceted. So it's shown by a gem, like a diamond, that has been cut. So it's not the raw gem, it's the cut gem that has been chiseled away and made to show its brilliance by all the different facets. And this star is also ruled by the divine architect, which is Vastar in its most primordial form, which is the genius of creation. And in its manifestation in the mythology and through the system of deities and gods and anti-gods that they have in the Vedic system, Vastar is shown through Vishwakarma, who is the celestial architect for the devas, who are the divine beings that are moving towards light. So if you know anything about yoga or the Vedic sciences, they have the three gunas, and sattva is the guna that is us moving towards our highest potential, our highest self. We're still not there yet because the gunas themselves are these ropes that keep us in the illusion, that keep us in the illusion of the world. But it's the part where we're moving towards the highest capacity we have within ourselves. And there's the more humanistic quality of rajas, where we're engaging with people in this world and kind of staying where we are in our humanness, not moving too high up, not sinking too far down. And then there's the Guna of Tamas, which is where we're in our most delusional state. And we might even be sedentary or lethargic, and we're stuck. Some of the heavier energies that we experience as people can bring us down into this tamasic guna. Well, as such, we can think of the gods and the anti-gods, or the devas and the asuras, as being part of this guna interpretation. And the celestial architect of the gods is designing things to bring us closer to our highest state of awareness, which is ultimate oneness with everything. The celestial architect for the asuras, and asura is like that without light. What without light actually is just a simple interpretation. So it's the energy that's pulling us down towards our more tamasic qualities. And there's also a human quality within the asuras, because they are driven by desire. They're driven by greed, lust, and sometimes apathy, oftentimes wanting more. So that quality of hoarding or gluttony is one of the qualities that the asuras often represent. And their architect is Maya, which is illusion. And that is there to create the same beautiful structures, but these structures are bringing us closer to our lower states. They're sinking us rather than raising us up. And if we think about structures starting in Virgo, it's an earth sign, right? So there's a very tangible quality to this. But once we move into Libra, it's an air sign, and it's the sign of relationships. It's the sign of how people relate, our harmonious quality, the capacity to relate in a harmonious way. Yes, the capacity to create beauty and art and things that uplift us, or again, can sink us down. But the most important thing is how we work with others. So these structures that are being built are not just physical structures, they're also relational. And do they work in a social way? Are they structures that bring us together? And if you think of just a house, for example, there's, ways you could build your house that would really isolate every room and make everybody very separated. And then there's ways you can build your house that are very open plan, where you could, somebody sitting in the living room perhaps can engage with whoever's in the kitchen cooking, this sort of open floor plan. And in many cultures and countries, we'll see maybe even a rounder organization of the structure of the house, where the center is this meeting area, and then everyone's rooms or different places they go are around that center focus. So if we even use, actual architecture, we can see that some is going to be more conducive to relating and harmonious relations, and some is not. Now we could think about a super open floor plan with no individual rooms at all, and then that might not be harmonious, right? Because there'd be no place for people to go. There'd be no way for people to have their own space or their boundaries. Similar to there's a phrase or a quote that's something like, good fences make good neighbors. Like having some boundaries and some things that separate us, some walls or fences, gives us more freedom in our relations, because then we're not all just stuck and piled upon each other, being forced to deal with everyone and everything in all our different multifaceted aspects of our life. Sometimes we're in a good mood, sometimes we're in a bad mood, sometimes we want to be alone, sometimes we want to be with other people, sometimes we have work to do, sometimes we want to break bread and eat and join with the other members of our family. So this concept of getting along, and how do we get along? We don't just get along with a free-for-all, for sure. There has to be some rules and boundaries and modes of operating that we work within. And this is a big theme for us right now. And I'm actually going to take this opportunity to shift us to the screen that actually shows our full moon. And we can see, the moon and sun are right directly across from each other. And this is a full moon in Libra in the Western system as well, because it's very early degrees in the sidereal zodiac. So the tropical zodiac will still have it there. But we can see the nodes have just moved in, Rahu here and Ketu here, and they have entered this axis of Aries and Libra. And the axis is one of self versus others. So how selfish are we? How much are we willing to compromise? And this full moon is like our first glance at this axis, because it's lighting it up for us. The sun is exalted in Aries, showing us our power and standing with ourselves. The sun is debilitated in Libra. We don't want to have our power in the place of compromise. We don't want to be compromising what we stand for and how we lead based on everyone else's feelings, whims, opinions, and whatever. But we do want to be able to compromise with other people in basic ways, whether it's conversation, or just how we relate to another person. Whether you walk into a store, do you hold the door open for someone, or do you just walk in yourself and slam the door and not pay any attention to anyone else? Do you drive, in such a way where you're paying attention to the other people around you and how it affects them? Everything you do is either going to, affect other people. Maybe you don't even realize how. Maybe you're sitting in a room by yourself and you're, working on your work, but the effect of your work on other people will come later. Or maybe you're just constantly surrounded by people, living in a city or living in an environment where there are a lot of others, and you need to be constantly aware of how that, of how your energy is in relationship to everyone else. So this self and others axis is going to be a theme for us for the next year and a half, because the nodes just moved in here on March 16th. And the first eclipse, the first thing that really activates the cycle, is a partial solar eclipse, which is going to be in 2 weeks. So it's going to be for the new moon in Aries. But the nodes move in backwards. So they're very late degrees. We see it's at 28-26. We see that the moon and sun are at 2:35. So they're very far. Right now, we're not actually having an eclipse, even though the sign is the same, even though the sun and moon are in the nodal axis as signs. It's not actually an eclipse right now. But in 2 weeks, we'll see the sun will be close enough to that north node that it will be a partial eclipse. And this is going to activate that cycle, but it's really kind of activating right now just by virtue of the fact that we're looking at this relationship and experiencing it. The moon, when it's full, shows us an alternative or an opposite of what the new moon cycle lifts off. Right now, we're at a point where our full moons are actually coming before our new moons. So we're seeing the opposite energy before we even have the full cycle set off. But the sun is there. So we are experiencing ourselves in a state of, what we need. What am I doing? What is my trajectory? What is my path? That quality of selfishness that is actually required in order to have good relationships with other people. You can't have one without the other. You can't be a good partner or a good friend if you're always compromising for other people and you're never standing in your own truth, because then everything you say is suspect. Nothing you do is really that trustworthy because you're always folding on your own boundaries. And if you can't hold your own boundaries, then how on earth will you ever be able to hold anyone else's or respect their boundaries, is maybe even a better way of putting that. So the need to be able to stand in our own power is quite strong. And that's why we can really see that debilitation when the sun shows up in Libra itself. But our moon is giving us that reflection saying, well, yes, you do need to stand in your power and you do need to do your own thing, but don't forget there's other people out there and we need to make sure that we're harmonizing with everyone else. And so we're stepping into that place right now. And you can also see Mercury is here in Aries. And again, the North Node, which is really going to exacerbate any energy there. So the North Node is where we're expanding. It is where we are dispersing, actually, and has a very airy quality as such. It kind of exaggerates and blows out of proportion whatever it's seeing, because the nodes are chayagraha. They're not actual bodies in the sky. They're places where the eclipses occur. So we only see them during an eclipse. And as such, they have this very illusory quality. And it is very affected by anything else that goes into its place. So just Rahu in Aries on its own is already dispersing the fiery quality of Aries. It's already exaggerating, magnifying that selfishness. It's already creating a situation where we are going to have more of a fixation and obsession with things like, war or fighting, anger, our anger that we feel, our militance, and also perhaps our own capacity to self-discipline and soldier up and do what we need to do and get on our yoga mat or do our run or do whatever, things we do to discipline our own self. But when we start bringing other planets into it, we're going to see Rahu affect those as well. And right now, Mercury is the one that is closest to Rahu. So we can see that there's maybe starting to be a bit of a mistrust or quality of exaggerating the words people say, the communication that we have. And because Mercury in Aries is already curt, it's already short, it's already to the point. In general, our buddhi, our intellect, doesn't operate very well in this place because it's already, not because it's already, but because Aries is where we're very black and white. It's where we're like, this is right, this is wrong. We don't have that nuance and that capacity to really take in information and feel objectively about it, because there's this bent towards this is right, this is wrong. It's like this, it's like that. And that quality that is quite militant, it comes out in our communication because it's the process we're actually experiencing in our thoughts. It can make clean, easy communication when you're dealing with certain things, like perhaps a business situation, or if you think about the writing of like Ernest Hemingway has this sort of quality of Aries Mercury. It was just like one sentence. I say this, the person went here, and then they went here, and then they went out to sea. And there's not a lot of flowers or, things to dress it up to make it very colorful or emotional, or in any way really try to relate or capture the other person in that way. So that's already something that comes up when Mercury is in Aries. And then to have Rahu on it can really exaggerate, like the person said 3 words, but we're like, what did they mean by those 3 words? And we could add our own quality of all this other stuff that's going on with our communication. Curt communication in general doesn't feel particularly good in relationships. So in romantic relationships or even friendships, that's generally not the most feel-good kind of communication. It might work for business or other things that we want to be a little bit shorter and less wordy, however. So that's one thing that's happening. And then, of course, the sun is going to move closer to Rahu, and we're going to see that in the eclipse. And I'll talk about that more at that time. But just imagining that dispersive, airy quality moving onto the sun is it's bringing the delusion and the illusion onto a very fiery orb that is about power and leadership and authority and the government. And it definitely can exacerbate some of the issues we have around those things, at least in our minds, which is so much of what we experience in this world is the illusion, right? Whatever we're thinking in our mind is how we go into the world and interact with it. It's one of the reasons it's so important to meditate first thing in the morning, because you need to clear your mind before you start going out into the world with all your subconscious stuff that came out from your dreamland. And now all of a sudden you're interacting with some poor person at the grocery store who, has never met you before. And you've got some bad dream from last night that you're putting on this person. So that quality of keeping our mind clear is very important. And that quality of recognizing when something is part of an illusion, or it's just the way we see it. It's not necessarily the way everyone else is experiencing it. One thing we can think of is like people do things and we're like, I can't believe that person would do that. Well, that person's not doing it for the same reason you would do it. And that's a very hard concept for most people to wrap their head around. The other person, you have a list of reasons why you would ever do something like that. Like if you said that sentence, it would mean you hated the person and you never wanted to see them again or whatever. When that person, that just might be how they communicate, or it might mean something totally different to them. So this quality of Rahu can really create a othering of people and seeing everybody as this sort of suspicious, foreign, other thing that is, not on their side and against them. And of course, Rahu in general has that foreign quality. The sun is power and governments. Like I said, there's communication with Mercury involved. And so this can be problematic on the world stage, especially given what we're experiencing right now already on the world stage. And of course, the South Node being in Libra is pulling us away from diplomacy. It's pulling us away from that capacity to really find common ground and compromise and be willing to do that. And so that's, that's where we're at right now. And it is exactly what it is. We're still in the Kala Sarpa Yoga. So all the planets are still within the nodes. Of course, this full moon is not, it's earlier degrees than K2, but once the moon moves past K2, which will not be too soon after the full moon, we'll be back into our 2 weeks of Kala Sarpa until Mercury passes Rahu. So we have this experience where all the planets are sort of shrouded in illusion. All the planets are put into this period of this time snake. And as such, we're operating from an area where we need to recognize that not everything is as it seems, and that it's almost like we step out of time in these periods and experience a sort of dreamlike reality. So it's important to, again, meditate and clear your mind on a regular basis, but also to not take things so personally or think that you understand more than you do. It's very easy to do that, especially with all the different noise we have coming at us from media, and whatever various shows or things that you might imbibe. It's easy to think this is what everyone's thinking, or this is the right thing to think, or this is this, because that's what's being fed to you. Or maybe your circle of friends is quite small and you mostly only see people or talk to people who have similar views to you. It can be easy to forget that everybody's coming from a completely different place, and that whatever each person's experiencing is really collective of their own reality, including you. So your reality is not the right one, which I know no one wants to hear, because everyone thinks their reality is the right one. But it takes a really great amount of intelligence to be able to step out of that viewpoint. And it takes a lot of capacity to be humble, to recognize that there's more than just one way of being. And often we can see that when we see people maybe in a totally different country or a very different reality than ours, like somebody who grows up in, the middle of an African desert as opposed to somebody living in a city, it's like, okay, that's obvious, right? That we have two totally different realities. But even two people living next door to each other in the city might have two very different realities. And that's also important to understand. So we have Jupiter just moved into his own sign of Pisces just days ago. It was on April 13th. And so we have an uplifting quality here. This is the good news. We have an uplifting quality with our beliefs. Jupiter has been in either Aquarius or Capricorn since really for the last 2 years, since April of 2020. We've had Jupiter in one of those two signs. And Jupiter does not operate particularly well in Saturn signs because of that constrictive quality. Saturn's all about time and fear and this quality of survival. And Jupiter is our expansion, it's our wisdom, it's our capacity to move out more towards truth, not to close in on some very limiting truth. And so this shift is a really big one. It's one a lot of us have been waiting for a long time, because it's almost painful to experience, especially if your own Jupiter isn't really in these kind of placements, and that you have a bit more expansion in your own capacity to see wisdom and truth. It can be really hard to watch how much we've struggled collectively with truth and with beliefs, and really coming from this sort of bare bones, like do or die mentality that Saturn can often promote. Jupiter rode into Pisces from Aquarius on this star called Purva Bhadrapada, which is his own star. It's his own nakshatra. And so we were gliding into this place. It wasn't so abrupt. And Purva Bhadrapada is really about the awakening of us, the awakening where we recognize we're more than just our body, and more than even just our mind, and that we're this sort of limitless soul. And so this is a time to really go back to those truths that are so fundamental and so within us all, that even just taking a swim in the ocean can bring you to that. The thing to be careful about, though, is, of course, that Jupiter in Pisces is going to have a bit of that aimless quality of Pisces, even though it's his own sign. It's very strong dignity, and this is how we reach higher to truth. It really depends on your own relationship with these things. Jupiter's other sign of Sagittarius is more about rules and choices and cultural or religious or spiritual dictates that people follow to get to truth. Whereas Pisces, we start to erase all of those lines. We start to erase all those definitions and categories and ways that you're supposed to do something. But it can become a big soupy mess if you don't have anything to stand on. If your belief systems were already pretty messy, and you didn't really have any lineage, or you didn't really have any specific practices you just sort of have these beliefs all over the place, it can be hard to anchor yourself when you're out at sea like that. So it's important to remember any that you do have, whatever practices you do have, whatever ground you ever did stand on, spiritually speaking. Remember that. Don't lose sight of that, even as you recognize the ways in which that is just also man-made and was necessary in order to contain information and wisdom and give us specific practices and things to do, so we're not just floating out at sea, but also have that capacity to expand even beyond those dictates or that dogma, if that's the spiritual religious world that you're and really it's not spiritual and religious, because beliefs are whatever they are. Atheist people have a belief. The belief is that there's no God. People who are secular have a belief. They put their beliefs in things such as governments and systems and the reality of people living in the world. They just don't have a belief that includes anything higher than what's here. It's a belief in the mundane. And so those beliefs are also limiting. Those beliefs also have their man-made quality that they're structured around. And specifically coming from Jupiter and Aquarius, we can see that those beliefs are temporal. They're of a specific time. They don't work all the time. You can't say, Black Lives Matter in ancient Greece. Like, you can't, certain things don't translate over time. They only work in that time when you know what's going on socially in that time and you know what's actually happening. So Jupiter in particular has trouble in that placement because of that, because truth is always timeless. Real truth is always timeless. So this step into Pisces is an opportunity to really expand beyond all those sort of limiting ways that we saw truth before. And oftentimes when we do that, we can come back to our present day reality with much more wisdom. We can come back to our present day reality and infuse into it that real truth in a way that can actually work within the temporal situation, within that time and place, particularly for the moment while Venus is still in Aquarius, because Venus is where we are working with relations and actual people and actual individuals. And this time and place works just fine for that, because where else are you going to meet another person besides here and now? So that combination of Jupiter and Pisces and Venus in Aquarius can be helpful in that way. Of course, Mars is there too with Venus. Mars and Venus have been traveling together for a while. And while their degrees have separated enough, we still can see that fight for Mars, especially in Aquarius, can be a fight, a social fight, social justice, anger at what is being seen as corruption or what is unfair in society, particularly in the star that both Venus and Mars are in, Satyabhishak. We can see that corruption comes up really high. And finally, we have Saturn is going to move by the end of the month. I'll probably do my new moon video before then, but it's going to be pretty much in line with the new moon, Saturn moving into Aquarius, which is his other sign. So this has been a long haul with Saturn in Capricorn since January of 2020. We can see the pandemic really just started as soon as Saturn went into Capricorn. And this quality of survival and accepting of death and accepting of loneliness is one of intelligence in many ways, where we're actually losing a lot of our attachments and our illusions. But it's also one that's been pretty constrictive feeling for us. And so having him move into his other sign, which is an air sign and has a bit more movement, we can see that there's more place to go. It's not so stuck and it's not so just do or die. There's a bit more capacity for movement around systems, around the social network. Again, Aquarius has to do with society, and air flight and things like this. But Saturn's only going to be there for a short while, and he's going to be moving retrograde in early June and start to move back into Capricorn. So July 15th, we're going to see him move back into his own sign of Capricorn, and he's going to stay there until January of 2023. So it's sort of just a short little stint that's going to give us a taste of what's to come. But technically, he's sort of still in Capricorn until January of 2023. But that shift we will feel for sure. And it'll be a good glimpse into what's going to come, because Saturn's transits are 2.5 years. They're quite long. So we end up experiencing that karma for a very long time. And especially if it's in a challenging place in your chart, it can be very heavy. You know, it can feel very heavy to us. So having any movement at all is like, okay, he's getting off of something. You know, if you have planets in Capricorn, if your moon is there especially, or your ruling planet or anything like that, you've been feeling that, you know, you've been feeling that pressure. So a little movement coming off and then coming back on. Now, of course, if it's true for you for Aquarius and that's where your moon is, or that's where your rising sign is, or that's where your ruling planet is, you know, you'll be feeling the intensity there, and it'll be a nice little preview of what you'll be experiencing to come. But Saturn is ultimately quite intelligent in his own signs, and the lessons we're learning here are ones that are very valuable and are bringing us closer to our ultimate freedom, because our ultimate freedom comes from losing our attachments to everything in our world that we are so attached to, even our relationships, even our form, even our own form. So I've spoken for some time here. I'm going to bring this to a close, but this is also the celebration of the birth of Hanuman. It's called Hanuman Jayanti, and Hanuman is ultimately the devotional quality, the devotional god. He's known for his incredible one-pointed fixation on helping Ram and Sita in the Ramayana. And he starts off as this very mischievous figure, this very mischievous monkey who needs to be sort of shown how to wield his power. And as such, when he does do that, he can't even use his powers until he's in a state of devotion, until he's in that place of ultimate devotion. And if we know of the stories of mostly the Puranic texts of these various, demon entities or these asuras who get cities, they get powers, and they get boons from usually Shiva, sometimes Brahma, that come because they've done their exercise, they've done their asana, they've done their meditation, they've done tapasya, they've held themselves in austerity on some level, they've disciplined themselves in some way, and as such, you get something from doing that. If you strengthen yourself and you're working out every day, you're going to be strong, and that is your boon. You're strong. If you do various practices, whatever it is you put your attention to, that's what you're going to grow. But if you do that without any devotion and you're doing it from a totally selfish place, and you're not even really doing it out of like karma yoga, wanting to help society or help other people or serve other people, let alone wanting to, direct that towards something higher, then that's what it's going to be. It's going to be a power that's devoid of love. And so Hanuman really shows us how the greatest power is in service of love and in service of devotion. And ultimately, this full moon is showing us that in many ways as well, because we have an opportunity to be both, to know the difference between when we should really stay true to ourselves and when it's a good time to maybe give a little. And it's not the easiest lesson for many of us. Most of us fall very strong polarity on one or the other, and maybe have been over compromising our whole lives and then feel the need to swing back the pendulum really strong, or have been mostly self-centered most of our life and are learning the hard way that other people don't like that. So wherever you fall on that scale, it's again an important time to check in with yourself, dive into yourself, lose the illusion around what you think you're doing. Ask other people what they think. One of the things I find most interesting in practicing Vedic astrology, is a lot of people know their Western sun sign and they think that's who they are, is their Western sun sign. Well, of course, move aside the argument on the accuracy of the Western sun sign and just stick to the fact that it's the sun sign. The sun is who you want to be. It's your consciousness. It's the part of you that's elevating up, but it's also the part of you that's taking those orders that's going to direct the rest of you. That's going to either be getting a download from source on how to direct everything, or it's getting a download from your partner or some other delusional figure in this world who does not know any more than you do, on how to conduct all the rest of yourself, all the other parts of yourself. And that part of you needs to be aligned. It needs to come from somewhere very high and very, very true. Some form of truth needs to be coming through you in order for everything else to be lined up, or else your foundation is already in trouble, is already shot. But there are a lot of ways in which we take or make things our own way or will our way through situations that are really just driven by our ego. And they really don't have anything to do with truth or even a need that we necessarily have, except for that need of our ego to be right, or that need of our ego to win, or that part of us that feels fearful that we won't have enough if we don't hoard or take more. So this is really just the start of a 1.5-year period where the more individuals that can step in and really enter that challenge of finding that balance, the better for all of us, because for sure there's going to be plenty that are not going to be up to the task, and there's going to be plenty of people who are really just blowing up that more selfish part of themselves and that more angry part of themselves, that more militant part of themselves. So blessings to all of you, and may we all have the power and grace and humility of Hanuman to devote ourselves and use our cities and use our power in the direction of truth and love. Namaste. Also, if you would like to know where these longer transits affect you in your personal natal chart, I do free reports on how they are for each of the 12 rising signs. So right now, if you go to my website, www.radhahomeyoga.com, and the address is right there beneath you, you can sign up for my newsletter and you'll instantly receive Jupiter and Pisces for all 12 rising signs. So I go through and discuss what 2 houses Jupiter rules for you and which one Pisces is and how that's going to affect you. And then also the nodal axis for all 12 signs. So where Rahu in Aries is for you in your chart, what house it is what area of your life is being highlighted, and where K2 in Libra is for you as well. So you'll get both of these 2 as soon as you sign up for my newsletter, and then you'll receive these bi-monthly full and new moon reports as well directly to your inbox. So if that's interesting to you, go ahead and sign up for that and have a blessed full moon. Namaste.